Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella from the channel Stubbornly Bookish, and today I'm going to be finally discussing my favorite books of the year. In the year of 2017, I read 65 books. 9 of those books I gave 5 stars. I also gave 5 stars to a couple of rereads that I did, but I'm not counting that. I know this video is super late, but I'd rather do it right, and frankly, I'm just glad that I'm doing it because I almost decided not to just because of how late I was with this video. But anyway, I have 9 fantastic books that I want to discuss with you, and also 2 extra super bonus mention books. So I'm going to shout out the 2 books quickly first. The first one is Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. This is the sequel to Lady Midnight. I love nearly every character in this series other than our 2 main ones, and that's kind of the reason why this book doesn't get the full 5 stars. However, I really liked the development of the world, and I like how this series, the Dark Artifices series, seems to be a little bit more mature. She's tackling some difficult subjects, and I like how she is developing these stories further. The other book I really quickly want to shout out is Wonder Woman by Leigh Bardugo. This book was a total surprise to me. I went into it with rather low expectations and was blown away. I did a spoiler-free review, so I will leave that linked somewhere. I loved all the characters. I thought it was so very fun and action-packed, and above all, I loved the emphasis on female friendships. I highly recommend it even if you don't love the superhero books, comics, movies, whatever. It's a really good story. Yeah, I was super happy with it. I really want my own physical copy. Alright, now actually on to the list. I have ranked them in order. I'm gonna go from 9 to 1. Number 1 is gonna be my favorite, and I'm really excited to share the books that are on my list. So the first book I'm going to share with you, and the 9th book overall on this list, is Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. This is the sequel to the Monsters of Verity duology, and I loved almost every single second of it. The first book essentially takes place in a world where human acts of violence breeds and manifests literal monsters. This duology is frankly really difficult to read at times. It's bleak and it pulls no punches, and it's sometimes really hard to stomach, but those are sorts of stories that I really love. Characters go through so much pain and suffering, but there's also always those little glimmers of hope. I love that Victoria Schwab goes there. She isn't afraid to hurt you, the reader. She isn't afraid to have her characters go through really hard stuff like I think a lot of young adult authors are. Victoria Schwab's writing is phenomenal as well, and I think this book is 500-ish pages, but I flew through it in a few days, and I highly recommend you give this duology a try. I'm probably gonna gush a lot with talking about all these books and keep saying I love them. That might get tedious, but this is my favorites video, so if there's any place to say I loved a book so very much, it is my favorites of the year. My 8th favorite book this year was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. Eliza is a regular old teenage girl who goes to school, but no one knows that she is the creator of the most popular online webcomic ever. But everything becomes more complicated when a boy named Wallace comes to school, and he is actually the most popular fanfiction writer of her online comic, The Monstrous Sea, and she has to deal with that and keeping her identity a secret, and I devoured this book. Above all else, was truly a love letter to fandom and fandom culture, and it sets itself apart from just regular contemporaries and even other contemporaries that have attempted to do this. Zappia really knows what it's like to be a part of fandoms and experience all the highs and lows that come of it, and it just bleeds through onto the page. I loved Eliza and the fact that she was kind of a little bit of a messy human. She wasn't perfect. She makes mistakes and screws up, but she's a good human, and I really liked that she wasn't perfect. Even the love interest, he makes mistakes too, but they have a really human quality and element to them that I personally really enjoy. And I know this book kind of follows some of the stereotypical beats that other contemporaries do, but with the added element of fandom and online friends and everything that's added to it, I devoured this book. I thought it was fantastic. Before I move on, I nearly forgot that Eliza suffers from severe anxiety and also later develops depression. So I would give a trigger warning for anxiety, depression, and even suicide. My next favorite book, book number 7 on this list, hit me right in the feels and was so very relatable to me, and it was The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. This book follows 17-year-old Molly who has had so many crushes in her life but has never acted upon them, never done anything about them because she's scared to put herself out there. She suffers from anxiety and she is also fat, and so many of these things filter through all of her decision making. This book was so relatable to me, and I just haven't really found that in a book previously for some of the things that I have gone through in my teen years and still kind of struggle with today. And I loved it for that. Both anxiety and being fat are own voices rep, and it comes through on the page, and the thoughts that Molly had are scarily similar to some of the thoughts and feelings I had when I was her age, and I just think that this book can do a lot of good. But enough about that. I should also discuss why else I loved it. I loved Molly. She was so cute and sweet as a main character, and she was just so pure and wholly good. I just said that she was purely and wholly good, but she also fucks up often, but she grows from her mistakes. She realizes when she's messed up, and that's why I love her. And I loved our main love interest. He was super nerdy and geeky, and the romance that develops between them is so nice and sweet. And the story was sweet and cute, and if that's not something you're into, I understand. And typically I'm not either, but it just happened to really resonate with me, and I think it will resonate with so many others. My next favorite book is kind of an unpopular one, and it is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. Now, I say unpopular because a lot of people don't like this one in the trilogy. They think it's boring and slow and nothing happens, but it's weirdly kind of why I loved it. This is the second book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. I think most people know about this book, but it is set in a world where there are 4 Londons, and the amount of magic that each London have varies, and I just love this series so much, but this one by far was my favorite. This book was very slow, and at the beginning I was a little frustrated by it, but I like that it built upon our characters that we already love and introduced 2 new perspectives from Alucard and Rye. I love the budding romances between both parties, and it was very much character-based before the insanity that is the 3rd book. I just love V.E. Schwab's writing. She has 2 books on this list. Her characters are fantastic, and I love the uniqueness of this story. My next favorite book on here was a last-minute entry, and it was The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. Holy shit, is this book great. This book is essentially fairy tales set in Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse, and that Grisha children would grow up reading, and oh my god, I loved every single one of these stories. They were dark and atmospheric, and they really subverted tropes in a very clever way, and it made me fall in love again with fairy tales and dark, creepy sorts of things. I really read fables as well. They had lessons that Grisha children would grow up learning, and I just loved them to pieces. And even if there was a story or 2 that I felt was a tad slow, that never really stopped my enjoyment from it, because the way that Leigh Bardugo would tie the story together at the end, I would be blown away by where she went with each story, and from conception to execution, this book is phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough, and even if you don't really want to get into the Grishaverse, these stories are worth it. Oh my god, this book, I loved it. I loved it so much. My next favorite book, and one that was a total shock to me was The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. Now, the reason why it was a shock to me is because whenever someone gives a synopsis for this, I think they set people's expectations up wrong, and that's why a lot of people don't tend to love this story. The Rest of Us Just Live Here is a contemporary story through and through, but it's set in a world in which superheroes and kind of having powers and fighting bad guys is a thing that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. It is a story about the humans. It is not a story whatsoever about the superheroes. In this story, they're called the Indie Kids, and the most you really ever get from them, and that in and of itself was hilarious, and it really made fun of the chosen one trope, which is a trope I really love, but it was hilarious to read. This story has a diverse cast of characters, and our main character, Mikey, is suffering from severe OCD, which I believe his own voice's representation. It's such a relatable story because they're just trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and whilst coping with the fact that the world is falling to shit like maybe every few years. It was fantastic. I loved it, and I cannot wait to get to more of stuff that Patrick Ness does. If you're a contemporary reader, I highly recommend this one because it'll kind of maybe dip your toe into maybe sort of fantasy, getting you used to some fantasy tropes. And if you're a fantasy lover, it's real fun to see people make fun of the chosen one trope, in my opinion. We're getting down to the top 3. My number 3 favorite book of the year, I don't think is a surprise to many. It was just so well done, and it is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This book is on so many people's favorites list for good reason. This book is inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, and it takes place in a fictional setting of Garden Heights and follows 16-year-old Star Carter living kind of, not a double life. She lives in a very low economic place, but she goes to a prep school that is rich and primarily by white people. She's kind of struggling with her identity, but everything changes when her childhood best friend Khalil is shot by a police officer, unarmed, not doing anything wrong, and her world is upturned. This book is incredible, and I cannot believe that it is a debut. Each scene was incredibly crafted with care, and you could go from cheering and laughing to crying within scenes. Angie Thomas is a fantastic storyteller. I cannot recommend this book enough. This book is going to do and has already done so much good for the world. On a personal note, it did help check my privilege and really put some things into perspective that I did not know and was ignorant of, and now that's not the purpose of this book. Angie Thomas very clearly says that this book is written for Black teens. Fantastic book, fantastic book. It's already essentially a modern classic, and it deserves everything it gets. My second favorite book, my runner-up favorite book of this year, was again a total surprise to me, and it is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This book is kind of a multi-generational novel set in Afghanistan. It spans about 30-40 years and is told through the perspectives of 2 different women, Miriam and Layla. It was a beautifully done, tragic, horrible story, and I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but that's what this book is about. It is the story between 2 women who've gone through so much shit. They've gone through literally some of the worst things that human beings can go through, yet they persevere, and their love for one another really just knocked me off of my feet. I cannot explain how much I loved and was invested between the relationship between these 2 women. And although this story was sometimes really horrible to read, I would put a trigger warning on domestic violence and sexual assault. Khaled Hosseini is from Afghanistan, and you can tell that he loves his country. It's had a really hard time, and you can tell that he loves it and he just wants it to be better. And oh my god, this story is making me emotional because of how good it was. The writing was beautiful and simple, and so very easy to read. I know why they assign it to rather young students. I loved it to pieces. I don't know if it's one that I could reread a ton because it's really heavy sometimes and super emotional, but any book that can make me sob my eyes out at 2 a.m. and just feel gutted is the word I would use. I highly, highly recommend you have to read this book. It's so important, and it taught me about a history that I am entirely ignorant of. Like, it's modern history. I think it starts off in the 70s or the 60s and goes up to very near recent day. Read this book. It is so important. It was fantastic. It was utterly fantastic. And my number one favorite book should come as a shock to literally no one, but yep, it's my favorite, and it is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I don't think I have the capacity, the words to describe how much I love this story and how beautiful I think it is. Laini Taylor is a master at her craft. She is so far above what we deserve. She is amazing, an amazing writer. I'm not going to tell you what this book really is about. When people give the synopsis, it makes me go, no, you're giving too much away. When I started planning for my spoiler-filled discussion, which I'm not done planning for because there's a lot to discuss, I started thinking of the few littlest bits that I think I would have preferred or liked changed slightly, and then I started to doubt myself whether or not I truly love this book. But this book isn't perfect, and there is a thing or two that I would have liked to be slightly different. However, it doesn't mar the fact that I loved it. I love this book so very much. This book was so original, and I've read nothing like it. When you think of a high fantasy story, you think of kingdoms at war, and frankly, this book was so very different from the norm that I just fell in love with that because of that sole reason. I was so thrilled that it was different. I loved the passion that our two main characters had separately for different reasons. The romance that develops is so amazing, and I just loved the romance, and it just makes so much sense to me. Every single character in this story has a purpose, and you can see their different perspective, and no one is really wholly good or wholly bad in this story. Everyone is morally gray. Everyone has reasons for their decisions and their choices, and you can see where every single character is coming from, and you can't truly root against certain people because you know of where they come from, you know their perspective, and I think that's something that not every writer can do. If you like high fantasy, this book is a must read. If you're kind of iffy on the genre, maybe wait a little bit because this book is very out there, and Laini Taylor's writing can take a little while to get used to, but once you get there, you will love it, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I can't recommend it enough. So those are my favorite books I read this year, and if you are a small creator, YouTuber that made this video, please let me know down below. I love watching these videos. I love getting these recommendations. So I will see you again very soon for my least favorite reads of the year, and yeah, bye!